What's up, everyone? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you. We decided to touch on a couple of extra ones since we already rounded out our year-end lists. But there was some stuff that came out a little bit late, and I can tell you guess why. COVID pretty much prevented a lot of stuff from being released, and then some bands just hammered away in the studio and put out stuff. So totally get it. So today we're going to review the newest offering from Deeds of Flesh, Nucleus. This came out on the 11th of December on Unique Leader. And this is a very interesting release in the sense that it's posthumous for one person at least, Eric Lindmark, who unfortunately passed away in 2018. And he is pretty much one of the main reasons why Unique Leader exists. He pretty much helped form that label and pretty much was the main founding member of Deeds of Flesh, which formed in 1993 in Los Osos, California. I didn't know that place was a place.
It's fun to say though, Los Osos!
It sounds like Los Assholes. The Assholes.
The Asshole, perfect. That's like a Thralls mantra.
Yeah. Now this band changed around their sound a little bit late in their career. They initially started off as straight up brutal death metal, very akin to bands like Dying Fetus, Baphomet, Gorgasm, stuff like that. Definitely a lot of suffocation worship in there. And then around the late 2000s/2010s, they really started shifting more towards tech death, still retaining a lot of brutal elements, but this is their first release since 2013's Portals to Canaan, which I thought was a really solid album, and it definitely kind of showcased that they have still elements of both that straight up brutal death style and this new embraced technical death style. Now this actually features Eric Lindmark's last bits of songwriting for the band. I believe at this point he was really suffering from MS, I believe that was it, but he never got around to really finishing this, and obviously things did not go well. And pretty much the band, I guess, decided to pick up. And it's really interesting in terms of the band, like it's more or less like a supergroup. Like this is very much like a tribute album. And they pretty much recruited a whole bunch of people to participate on this. Not only just the main band, but a lot of guests.
12 to be exact.
This album has more guest spots than 3 Soulfly albums. Virtually every track has a guest on it. But the main lineup consists of Jacoby Kingston, who was a former bassist of Deeds of Flesh, but is just doing vocals on this. Darren Seska, who has done drums for Pillory, Eschaton, and he actually was on Arsis.
Arsis is We Are the Nightmare.
Yep. Craig Peters on guitars. He's a former member of Archaic. And Ivan Munguia. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, bud. He is the bassist on here, and he is also a former member of Archaic and also a former member of Brain Drill.
Which makes total sense.
Yeah. Once you hear
because
his bass
work, his bass work on this record's nasty.
So this album opens up with Odyssey, which is pretty much a big cinematic intro. Like, I felt like we were watching just like someone was playing a sci-fi movie in the other room, but we couldn't see it, but we could just hear the dialogue.
Right, now, and it sounds really familiar, but I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out what it was. I Google searched it. I know you were looking for it.
I was thinking of video games, sci-fi movies. It may have been an original piece. It may be something they actually had scripted on there, but I didn't see any credits for. Oh, it was a female that was actually doing the bulk of it, and then slowly the growls start fading in. But I couldn't find it. I looked up specific lines for this.
So if you know, please tell us. It's driving me crazy at this point. Like now I have to know because I couldn't find it.
I'm thinking it might be a video game or just a random sci-fi movie. Either way, it pretty much sets up pretty much the theme for this, which is very sci-fi oriented. And as this intro goes on, it really builds into this kind of cool intro song. Now this is kind of an intro, but it's interesting how it builds, and then Jacoby takes over the vocals, but he's still doing the spoken word, except in growls. I don't know, it's an interesting setup. You get a sense of the production right away, which I have to say, it's a very polished production, but generally I don't like super polished death metal, but this still retains some grit.
I didn't even think it was super polished. I still think it maintains its brutality.
It doesn't sound polished to the point that there's barely a human element left on it.
Yeah, so in this case, it's definitely technical death metal, but it's not technical for the point of being technical. It's not noodly because they can noodle.
And I think the main thing is the mix. The levels are nice and even. Nothing really just jumps out like, oh, that's too loud, or could you bring that up a little bit? It's all very evenly done, and right away, I mean, you're getting into these giant songs, Alien Scourge, which just opens up in a flurry of technical riffing, lots of palm-muted chugs.
Lots.
The
They're
vocals
all over this record.
are really interesting on this too. This is, I believe, one of the few ones where it's just Jacoby doing all the vocals. There's no guests on this one. And it's interesting how he sort of alternates back and forth. It opens up with kind of a necrophagous feel, like not only in the technical play, but his vocal delivery is very similar to Muhammad's in terms of it was just kind of minimalistic and interesting points where he would come in. And then you get in kind of that, Frank Mullen sort of hardcore bark that you hear in like Suffocation songs, which, believe me, we're going to talk about Frank Mullen here in a bit.
Speaking of, I know Nick said chugs and palm mutes. The riffs on this album are just nasty.
Tight.
They're tight, all over the map, like on Catacombs of the Monolith. The riff that starts at about the minute and 20 mark is really nasty. And then, of course, it's got Luke LeMay from Gorguts on vocals.
Very distinct vocals, too. I mean, he's always kind of like had that raspy delivery, much like Chuck Schuldiner, at least in the earlier years. But it's cool hearing him and Jacoby alternate because you get two distinct vocals. And there's like a fair amount of like dissonant riffing in this song, too. And I don't know, I kind of liked how this one kind of flowed. It's a very interesting construction, and this is where I started like thinking about like themes to this album and such, because it has that sort of sci-fi theme. It really seems like it follows kind of a narrative. And the only thing I could think of was the Faceless and Nile got together and made a concept album about their favorite episodes of Ancient Aliens, because you get to talk about Egypt and weird space stuff at the same time, and then do with the weird hair.
You're right.
But it's really interesting. It kind of transports you, and I think this song is definitely a little bit more on the atmospheric side when it's not just beating you over the head with just pummeling riff after riff.
All these songs beat you over the head with pummeling riffs. Heavy, heavy, heavy. The rhythm section works so well together in Deep the Flesh.
It's incredibly tight. Like, I don't think you have to be with the level of technical play on here. But it's good because it balances it out with like straight up brutal riffs. Like you still get that more old school Deeds of Flesh sound. Granted, it's not the bulk of the sound, but it's in there. You still hear it. Ethereal Ancestors has a really cool fade in, and it kind of moves into this really awesome syncopated chug that just screams early Meshuggah.
Yep.
And this one has a really special guest star as well. It has Corpse Grinder from Monstrosity, and no other band that I can think of right now. Maybe Cannibal Corpse.
Maybe. There's something about Corpse Grinder. I don't know what it is, but there's something about his voice when I hear him on a song, it just makes me smile. And that shouldn't be.
It's like a giant ape just growling in your face. Like,
that's why I go to the zoo. My favorite part of going to the zoo is when all the animals yell at you. They just hurl past transgressions in your face.
And poop. But I think the title track is where it gets right down to those early roots again. And what better person to get down to like straight up brutal death metal than John Gallagher?
Yeah.
They bring him in, and he pretty much burps his way through these nasty breakdowns. If you've ever listened to Dying Fetus, you know what John Gallagher sounds like. And it is an absolute stomp of a song. But what's interesting is towards the end of the album, that's where the bassist really just like, oh, hey, I'm going to take over these moments here.
Oh, my dear Lord. The noodles he does, they last probably like 4 or 5 seconds, and it's just... You ever watched Origin play live? You ever watch how that guy just molests his fucking bass?
He attacks it.
Yeah, well, that's what I imagine is happening here.
Now, there are points in here where I think it is a little too bloated with guest vocalists. Ascension Vortex and Races Conjoined, each one of those has 3 different singers on there, and sometimes they don't pivot off of each other particularly well. Sometimes their vocal style kind of blends together. On Ascension Vortex, you have Decrepit Bill from Decrepit Birth, Obi Flett from Inherit Disease, and Anthony Trapani from Severed Savior. And it's really hard to break up what they're doing. Plus, you also have Jacoby on there, too, doing the bulk of it. They're just kind of in there to sort of, like, season the meat a little bit.
I will say, though, more so for Ascension Vortex and less so for Races Conjoined, what I will say for Ascension Vortex is at least those vocal parts, it seems like each part of the song was written for that vocalist. Like, it's not... Like, Races Conjoined was pretty much it. Like, they're just all mushed in there together, and you can't really tell who's who, except for Frank Mullen.
Yeah, you can definitely tell Frank.
On the end, you can definitely tell Frank. Although it's been a couple years for Frank, and that shows too.
Yeah,
it's not as low.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's kind of been going up a little bit in past releases for Suffocation, but I mean, I think this was, again, the whole idea behind this was kind of a tribute, maybe not necessarily a rekindling of the band. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't know, that was the overall feel. Like, they're paying tribute, they wanted to sing on these songs, their past buddy, and Eric knew how to write some killer songs.
Yeah.
He was an absolute awesome death metal guitarist. I kind of like the gang growl effect they would have. That's where it actually worked a bit more, but when they were breaking it up, it was kind of hard to tell who was doing what, minus Frank. The other thing on this is occasionally I maybe get a little too happy with the samples in terms of, like, building up the epicness, and sometimes they kind of come in out of nowhere. Like, there's a spot on Alien Scourge where everything drops out and it's this weird synth sci-fi wash, and then it just picks up again.
And then it picks back up, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like, it seriously, it drops off out of nowhere and goes into this weird synth shit, and then it picks back up as if the synth was never there. Like, okay, why did you put a 20-second synth in there with,
But yeah, just like some extra stuff on there they did in terms of, like, build up and stuff. Sometimes it just felt like a bit much. But one of the most interesting things on here, and one of the most appropriate things, I think, was the last track, Onward, which is pretty much just an outro. But while we were listening to it, we pretty much figured out what it was.
It's a Viking funeral.
Yeah, it kind of just starts off, you hear water, like running water or waves crashing. It's kind of hard to make out at first because there's also some tribal drums, and then also you start hearing, like, Viking chants.
Chants and stuff, and then you hear someone screaming and crying, and then you hear flames, like, over, like, really calm waters, and you're just like, ah.
And it makes sense.
Yep.
This is their funeral for their buddy, and, he found this entire label, this band, and this was kind of the thing that makes me think that this might just be a one-off just to kind of close it out. I'm not sure. Again, it feels more like a tribute.
And that would make sense. Why you have 12 musicians on an album, pretty much everybody just wants to say goodbye.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm absolutely certain that all these guys got to meet him, got to hang out with him, probably got to play with him and tour with him. And yeah, this is their big send-off, and it was pretty cool. I mean, overall, I'm not the biggest tech death fan, but I do like the fact that it didn't go over tech for the most part, and you still had a lot of grooves, still a lot of hooks, solid lead work throughout. Like, every single song had really crisp leads, and they were different.
I mean, it reminded me a lot of Decrepit Birth. Like, it makes sense, like, because Matt Sotelo, the guitarist from Decrepit Birth, appears on one of the songs. And, like, it just makes sense.
So overall, I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. I think it's a pretty solid album. I'm kind of knocking it down just a little bit just because I prefer the older Deeds of Flesh. That was what I got into. That was my first exposure to Unique Leader, and that was why I kept buying stuff on that label. I like the tech turn. I think they're really good at it. I just would prefer to hear a little bit more of that older style in there. And yeah, sometimes it's a little overly bloated with just tech noodlery, which is cool. It's very impressive, but sometimes it takes away from the songs. But man, when they get down to the just beat downs and just nastiness that is Deeds of Flesh,
it's heavier than nuts.
It whoops your ass. And this is a pretty solid send off for Eric. So yeah, great job.
I'm gonna give it 4 stars for that ass beating. It's just downright heavy. Every time when it's not full of crazy, awesome, wonderful melodies, it is punching you in the dick. Even if you do have a lot of guest vocalists, it's not like it was a bad thing. It was kind of cool to hear everybody come together, and again, once you figure out that the end of it is in fact a Viking funeral, the whole record makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the record is more like a celebration of life.
Celebration of a life of a man who definitely deserves a celebration. So
he impacted all of death metal. I would go as far as that.
Yeah, I would openly say that too. So yeah, 4 stars for me. Great album.
So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We will catch you later.